So, as Phil said, this work was initiated late last year when the Council resolved to pursue work towards the development of a food security strategy. The resolution was passed in December. I started the work soon after. So I was engaged essentially to work with the Council and the community to better understand issues in relation to access to food on Norfolk Island and articulate some key priorities and recommended actions to address these issues. So why this initiative from the Regional Council? It was motivated by essentially providing a framework to the objectives set by the Community Strategic Plan 2016-2026 to create a food secure community. It was also reinforced by more recent work, notably a survey that was done by NARAX on the state of food security on Norfolk Island. This piece of work was led by Karen Innes-Walker at the hospital, and it identified some serious concerns within the community in terms of accessing healthy food. So that was the context for this work, essentially. How the process went, so it was a collective effort by the community and the council working with me towards identifying what were the main issues and how would we structure our thinking towards developing a food security strategy. So this collective effort was really led by the community. A lot of people that were interested interested by these issues and around the topics related to food. Back to this, the context of this work and the food security strategy in a global context. We're seeing regional, local governments around the world getting heavily involved in supporting the development of local food economies, seeking to reap benefits for community health and well-being, but also to diversify local economies. We've seen a trend of the last 10 years of better understanding the consequences or impacts and contribution of the food system to the major global challenges that society is facing: environmental challenges, climate change, and biodiversity loss, soil depletion, water pollution, and scarcity. We also now understand that food system can be part of the solution. If we are to relocalize food and reduce food miles, we enable food to be produced and consumed locally instead of going around the world several times before ending up in our plates. So that's really been a driving force in this movement around the world, the community movements and local governments taking action to relocalize food systems. So that's been a big sort of influence in the development of this food security strategy. So this is a draft that we'll be presenting tonight that will be exhibited on the council's website for about 4 weeks, I understand. So you're very welcome to obviously have a look at it, contact me, provide some feedback, some comments, and be critical. And if there's anything to add or anything that you feel needs to be rethought, this is what this process is for. It's important, I think, to keep in mind that this process was initiated by NERC with the support of the Commonwealth Government, but this is not the sole responsibility of NERC to implement the strategy or to go forward with this work. It requires a collaborative, cross-sector approach to really drive systems level change. And that's where I think the community and government really have an opportunity to work together and for the community to be a driving force behind this work that will have an influence in terms of food security and access availability of hopefully local food, but also will have impacts on other areas such as waste, reducing waste and using farmland sustainably on Norfolk Island with all the environmental and ecological benefits that might have, as well as diversifying the economy and providing business and employment opportunities within this community. So I'll just leave you with a quote for a few seconds before starting the presentation. In a well-functioning community food system, the food production, processing, distribution, consumption, and post-consumer waste disposal are all integrated to enhance the environmental, economic, social, and nutritional health of the particular place and its inhabitants. All right, so do you want me to start this again? In the wealth, you've got it here also. Is it? Sorry, yeah. I mean, I have to apologize. Yeah, I've put some presentations there. I have to apologize. Sometimes the font size is very small. So in a well-functioning community food system, the food production, processing, distribution, consumption, and post-consumer waste disposal are all integrated to enhance the environmental, economic, social, and nutritional health of a particular place and its inhabitants. So I'd like to leave you with this quote for a fraction of a second, because we have to move on, we don't have much time. But this sort of sets the tone for the work that we've been doing, from the feedback that we've got from the community, that it is possible to achieve this, but it requires a strategic approach. It requires, as I said earlier, this collaborative work between community and all levels of government to drive systems level change. So this is just the structure of the strategy that you will find on the website of the Council. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. I don't know how I'm going with time, Tara. I know I didn't ask for this, but is it all right? So the background, I've sort of gone through this already. The policy statement, why this policy, this food security strategy, this policy document has been commissioned. The vision that has emerged from all the discussions where this community would like to be in 10 years' time, the aim of the strategy, its objectives, the guiding principles, some definition around food security, how the strategy has been developed. Then I will say a few words about Norfolk Island's food system. I've already mentioned a few things, and we'll hand over to Jason to present the land capability assessment and the agricultural audit. And then we'll come back with the strategy. How do we achieve the vision? So the 11 key priorities and the recommended actions to achieve this vision. So the policy statement, the Norfolk Island Regional Council recognises the risks of food insecurity for the Norfolk Island community and is committed to working collaboratively with all levels of government and community to improve food security. In this approach, NERCS recognises the importance of sustainable and resilient local food systems in helping to not only address food insecurity issues, but also support the sustainable use of farmland and diversify the local economy, provide for employment and business opportunities, and at the same time address diet-related public health issues that are present in these communities. So the vision that we've come up with for Norfolk Island, a resilient, healthy and food secure community, and more specifically, Norfolk Island has a strong local food economy where all residents have access to healthy, diverse and affordable foods that are grown, raised, caught and processed sustainably by local producers. So the aim of the strategy is to improve availability of sustainably produced nutritious food and promote a food system that responds to consumers' demand for local foods, protects the environment and enhances the health, well-being and economic prosperity of the Norfolk Island community. The objectives, and we've already gone through this, first and foremost, access to healthy, affordable, culturally appropriate food for this community. It's also about community, another objective is community food literacy and enhanced agricultural knowledge and skills. Another objective, community participation in the decision and activities that shape Norfolk Island food systems, public health outcome by improving access to local healthy foods, promoting sustainable agriculture to increase natural capital and agrobiodiversity and to promote environmental stewardship. Another objective is the strong local food economy that creates opportunities for business and employment, reducing food packaging waste and integrating circularity in the food production system. And finally, building capacity for any individuals in this community that want to engage in agricultural production and the food system at whatever level, household level or on a commercial scale. The guiding principles, so that is the values that are underpinning the strategy. Access to nutritious foods, food security, is a basic human rights. It is enshrined in international law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights enshrines the right to food, and the Covenants, 1966, to which Australia has ratified. Food security is a necessary prerequisite for optimal health and well-being. The factors affecting food security are complex and require a multi-level approach that recognizes the interrelatedness of the many factors that influence what people eat. Planetary health requires redesigning our food systems and agricultural practices based on agroecological principles to equally prioritize productivity, environmental, social, and human outcomes. Respecting, protecting, and promoting Norfolk Island's tradition, food cultures, and values are the foundations of resilient community. And finally, the last guiding principle is food security issues require better connectivity between all levels of government in a cooperative effort with the members of the Norfolk Island community. Just very quickly, the definition of food security for those that may wonder what exactly we mean by food security. This is the most accepted definition to date that was coined at the World Food Summit in 1996. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So it is the determinants of food security. It is about availability, but it's also about accessibility and affordability of healthy and diverse foods. And it's also about food literacy, that is the capacity to make informed choices when it comes to sourcing food and making healthy food choices that enable people to have an active and healthy life. So how the strategy was developed, I've gone through this at the start. It started in December last year. It's a process that involved community engagement and consultations. We set up a steering committee with cross-representation from various members of the community and different sectors in Norfolk Island that were represented on the steering committee, health and economic development, and food producers as well. We had several meetings throughout the first half of the year that informed and guided the development of this policy document. It involved obviously data collection and analysis, the review of policies and laws, but also best practice in Australia and globally, looking at other initiatives from governments that have initiated similar processes to have a policy framework to guide actions around food security and food the systems strengthening at the local level. The agricultural audit and land capability assessment that Jason has helped us with, that will be presented to you shortly. So mainly, as I said, and a main consideration in the drafting of this strategy was to take a food systems approach. That is looking at all the different elements and activities that relate to the production, processing, distribution, and the consumption of food, and the outputs of that in terms of health, environmental, social outcomes. For a long time, traditionally, these different issues have always been addressed in silos at government level: health, food security, agriculture, biosecurity, environmental protection have always been addressed in a fragmented way by different agencies. The advantage of a food systems approach enables to develop solutions that have multiple positively reinforcing benefits across a range of policy objectives. It's about increasing access to healthy food, as we said, but it's also about nutrition and health and well-being of the community, about diversifying the economy and promoting ecological sustainability. But this requires moving from a siloed approach to a more integrated, collaborative approach between different levels of government and across sectors as well. So that's really what the food security strategy is trying to promote. So we've looked at what a sustainable and well-functioning community food system would look like, and how we can get there, how the Norfolk Island community can get there. So there are three pillars that constitute a sustainable, well-functioning food system. One being food sovereignty. That is supporting, strengthening local supply chains and lessening the dependence on global markets. It's about ownership and control by communities, by producers, consumers, distributors of the food supply chains. It's about environmental stewardship and promoting farming practices that are more aligned with ecological principles. It's about reducing food miles. It's about integrating circularity in food production systems and reducing or eliminating waste. It's about promoting agrobiodiversity, healthy soils that leads to healthier plants and healthier diets, and therefore healthy human beings. So it's then about community benefits in terms of nutrition and health, in terms of food cultures, in terms of jobs and business opportunities, and awareness and appreciation of real food. So this leads us to where Norfolk Island is at the moment in terms of its food production system. I'm not going to go through this again. I've already said a little bit about this in the introduction. We'll hand over to Jason now to talk about what is observed and what his findings are in relation to the capability for agricultural development on Norfolk Island. And we'll then come back and talk about the strategy itself, the key priorities that have been identified and the recommended actions.
Thanks very much for, first of all, the first time I came over, and then being able to come back is fantastic. So what I was tasked to do was an agricultural audit and a land use capability assessment. And I've got lots to tell you, so I'm going to get straight into it. So in this presentation, I'll just briefly touch on how we went about doing it. So it's not just us coming up with a whole bunch of ideas. I'll go into the land capability side of things and explain what that is, the agricultural audit, and most of the report is listing off a series of options, opportunities, things that can help going forward. I'm not an academic, I'm not a researcher, so the things that I do in my profession are practical, and that's what this report contains, a lot of pages of the things that I do to help my clients and to grow food. Now, whether this is growing a 20 hectare paddock of potatoes or whether you're growing 20 square metres of potatoes, it's the same things. It's not the big guys do things very different to the small operators. It's not like that. It's the same principles, the same fundamentals apply. So, how do we go about doing it? Not sure if any of you got to meet Chris Thompson. He looks like a garden gnome. He's not here to defend himself, so I can say that. but he wouldn't disagree with me. So between Chris, who was here in February or March, Phil's laughing because he knows exactly what he is, but he's great. He's my boss and pays a bit of my salary as well, so I have to be, just if you ask, tell him Jason said he was great. So we talked to a lot of people. We talked to producers and consumers, we talked to retailers, we talked to people in the food service, the restaurants and things like that. So we spoke to a lot of people and had a lot of conversations. I made a lot of observations, so did Chris, and it was great. People were very open and people shared their thoughts, the good stuff, the bad stuff, the great stuff. Spent a lot of time, and you can all relate to this, Norfolk Island's been under the magnifying glass of a lot of researchers and a lot of investigations and a lot of science because it's a very special place. So a lot of documents, a lot of data sets. We looked at the climate, the land use, etc., and things like that. We went about looking at how we're going to do a land capability assessment, and I'll come to that in a sec. Looked at crop types, livestock holdings, land use constraints, not just the slope, but logistics and all these sort of things coming into it. All the things that affect food producers and eventually go through to the consumers. And then finally, as I said, a whole lot of actions and ideas and thoughts and opportunities to help improve and advance the current productivity and sustainability. And I think, and you'll hear me say this a number of times, definitely encourage new people to come in and help pass the baton through. So, I'll start off with this one. No, don't worry about that. Okay, so here's Norfolk Island on the left. It's a land zoning map. That's the amount of specific types of land use available. We looked at the total amount of agricultural land, 2,257 hectares. Take out the houses, etc., and stuff like that. Pretty hard to do that on a mapping scale side of things. But if you said take away all the houses and where can't we grow anything on in the airport, around the residential areas and the heritage sites, that's the amount of land that we've come up with. And this is what the land capability reports. That hasn't quite come out exactly what we want it to be. However, on the colours, green is class 1 and 2. Hold on, I'll take this back. The science that goes in behind this has been produced based on using 25 centimetre accurate LiDAR maps, which are very, very accurate. They take into the topography. We had soils maps. There was data sets from CSIRO. There was a lot of information that put this together. This is based on the Queensland Land Capability System. I could have used the Tasmanian, the Victorian, the New South Wales. We don't have a universal plan of how this works for Australia. Each state's developed its own system. I used Queensland because it was closest. Holds true though, how this works out to be. So class 1 and 2 land, which is the green areas. Essentially, this is the best land. What it means is with land capability, the highest rating, 1 and 2, means you can do anything with it. You can grow crops, you can grow vegetables, you can graze cattle, and the amount of limitations or constraints imposed upon it are very low. So you can do a lot of things on it very frequently. There's around 684 hectares in total, all right? We haven't stripped out the houses, all the roads, etc. and stuff like that, but 684 hectares. Class, that should be 3 and 4, apologies for that. 562 hectares. This is starting to limit the amount of land use and the intensification of the land use that's been grown on it. Often slope starts coming into it. We've got erosion risks, etc., and exposure to wind and things like that. And it's grazing. The majority of the agricultural land on Norfolk Island is class 5. It's pretty much limited to grazing. It's steep country. It's country that basically if you can't drive a tractor on it, or you're scared to drive a tractor on it because what might the consequences if you get it wrong might happen, and effectively slope's the biggest limiting factor. So we're talking about erosion risks and trafficability. The majority, and it's pretty clear cut, Ansons Bay, and I'm saying stuff that you guys know, Ansons Bay, Headston Road and Steeles Point basically accounts for the majority of all this high quality agricultural land. And in my opinion, And look, I've been lucky to travel around the world, lots of parts of Australia, New Zealand, North America and Europe. Your Class 1 land and Class 2 land is as good as I see anywhere. So it's not as though you've got a separate little system here. If I could go anywhere and say Class 1 and 2 land, in Tasmania, you know, a third of the state's wilderness areas, as a proportion, we would not have anything like that amount of Class 1 or 2 land in the agricultural state of Tasmania. So it actually represents quite a significant amount of total land in the whole agricultural estate on Norfolk Island, rates like that, which is pretty rare, I've got to say. That's not normal, okay? The sort of things that, what can this map be used for going forward? I get involved in a lot of property planning and things like that, and going forward in time, hopefully these sort of land capability reports do inform higher authorities about where zoning might happen and what land needs to be preserved or not preserved as the case may be. Because if you start losing some of this land and you don't have, there's no more happening, like, and you're not going to clear any into the national park, you've got to preserve it, it's got to be protected. So the thoughts around how this map gets used in Tasmania, I get involved in property planning and things like that, and this is one of the very first things that we go to and try and classify. And in Tasmania we use the concept of prime agricultural land, and that would be Class 1 and 2, okay? So it's important, we've got to preserve this sort of stuff. So look, I'm saying, I listed these off and you'll nod your head and maybe you'll say, hold on, you missed that other stuff in there. But look, these are constraints, limitations and threats to agriculture. Biosecurity requirements, that goes both ways. Okay, so you've got issues with the importation of produce and restrictions about certain things, but it also goes along the way of avoiding the threats of having imported exotic pests, weeds and diseases coming in. So it goes both ways. Unreliable, expensive shipping, transport services impacting not just the supply, well, not just the cost, but the supply of inputs coming in. So when you want to get fertiliser, when you want to get seed, etc., plus the cost. And this is a big one. So social factors. You've got an older age group of growers, and this is right across Australia. It's a big issue that's happening out there. So the average age of a farmer is not a Gen X. It's someone in their mid to late 50s. Everyone's got changing lifestyles. So in the past, when everyone had big gardens and grew lots of vegetables and those sort of things, that's changed. Look, people are busy. People don't have a lot of time. People are willing to trade money for a service. And the best example is buying frozen meals. You know, they take 7 or 8 minutes in a microwave, you know. Anyway, so that's a big thing, these changing lifestyles. Lack of labour supply, it hits everything. Norfolk Island's just a microcosm of what's happening on mainland Australia and Tasmania as well. And if you notice, I say Tasmania and mainland Australia, so that's how we think about the mainland. So, I think, look, whilst I saw a few new plant genetics, I reckon there's a lot out there that, because if you don't know to ask the question or you're not offered them, and I'm going to give you a good example of newer plant genetics that are available, you do have the increasing impact of a few exotic pests and weeds. This is a threat. Your soil quality is top notch, all right? These are young volcanic soils. In Tasmania, where I'm on the northwest coast, our volcanic soils are 30 million years old, structurally awesome, they're infertile and they're acidic. The soil tests that I've seen are good, and I'm seeing good soils. So you've got to keep them like that. And you've got the ongoing challenge of growing seasons, and there's clear evidence of a drying climate here. The CSIRO study was awesome, looking at the meteorology, looking at the water table and things like that. There is clear evidence of a drying climate. And whether you want to say it's a 30-year drying cycle or a 200-year drying cycle, whatever, it's a drying climate, okay? That's what the evidence shows. All right, these are the opportunities. I'll whiz through them and I'll get into a few more details. In in the report, it goes into a lot more detail. In this presentation, I've combined a few of them in there. I see absolutely no problems with the maintenance of conventional and organic production systems. There's the opportunity to improve plant varieties, opportunity to improve organic practices, implement soil testing, reinvigorate protected agricultural production sector. I'll spend a bit of time talking about self-sufficient supply of nutrients. I'll throw out there the use of recycled water, and I'll go into some details about that. This is a big infrastructure opportunity for the island, establishing a community-run cool store facility. I'll go into a couple of things. Establish a cool store facility. Yep. Might be a little bit different to what we think about, like the cool store in the supermarkets, for what I'm thinking about. Anyone coming into agriculture or wanting to get bigger or diversify, this is just a general, we always say this, improve your business management skills. That's just something that we really like people to get better at. And I'll finish on education extension. So, right. Improved agronomic practices and plant varieties. So everyone can get better at this. Look, I deal with great growers, and we always try and challenge and push beyond, try and deal with different circumstances with pest and disease and things like that that are always changing out there. So knowledge and awareness of some of these new agronomic practices or reinforcement of what we're doing now is the right thing to do, and we can keep going down that pathway. Do we need to tinker on the edge? There's a lot happening in the crop protection space. So this is, and bear with me as the people this morning, I'm not selling or advocating the use of agricultural chemicals, but there are soft and there are organic options and there are conventional options which can be used safely. And there's a lot happening in that space, all right? But if you don't know the question to ask, or you're not being serviced by someone who gets exposed to this sort of science, well, it's not your fault that you haven't changed. It's just that you haven't been exposed to what's there. I always put up soil structure. Like if we bugger our soil structure, doesn't matter how good your plant genetics are, you're in trouble. So avoid overcultivation, etc., and those sort of things. And soil health. So this is all the microbiology and the worms and all these things that live in the soil and make it a thriving and flourishing community. We've got to look after it, because if we start damaging one aspect of that microbiology, strange and unintended consequences happen, and it's usually death of 1,000 cuts. If you bugger your soil, generally it doesn't fall over next year, it falls over and the next generation goes, why did we do this? Why did you do this? Because anyway, now we know a bit better. Spend a bit of time, plant nutrition, I'll come to that in a sec, but there is the opportunity to optimise plant nutrition. I'm not telling you to go and paste on a whole heap of fertiliser. I'm just telling you plants need what they need. And it's very easy to go, well, maybe they need this extra trace element, I'll just put it on. What harm can it do? Look, if it doesn't need it, don't put it on. Anyway, soil fertility. In the report, I was able to make contact with ALS Laboratories in Brisbane. They have a soil importation licence. They can take soil from Norfolk Island, take it into their labs in Brisbane and run a conventional suite of tests on it. It took a long time to get to that laboratory. As far as every other laboratory is concerned, you live on Mars, all right? Okay? Now, you wouldn't believe the conversations I had with it going, no. So this is the weird thing. I can send a soil test over to North America and go and get it tested in a lab there. Until I found ALS, it was going to be a lot harder to send it from Norfolk Island to Brisbane on a 3-hour flight. Anyway, they have the information's all in the report, the protocols, the importation licences, everything that you've got to quote. The whole protocol is listed out in there. You don't need a soil test every year, but to establish a baseline where you're at now would be good for a lot of growers.
Sorry, Chris, what's the point of soil testing nowadays?
Yeah, so if we know our nutrient status in our soils, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, pH and trace elements. Soils in a cropping system, even in pastures, they generally accumulate nutrients over time. And we've all got a tendency to go, and I'll say a product that you guys will know about, Nitrophosca Gold, Nitrophosca Special. You use it because it's what's here. Do you need to use it? I mean, at the moment, and you're no different from the growers I deal with right throughout Australia, that we just do what we do and we always have done it. So this is the way we keep going forward. So we want to tailor those nutrients. Do we need to put phosphorus on or potassium there? There's things that we can do. If we don't need these inputs, because the way plants work, whether it's a grass, a potato, any of them, it's not a linear response curve. So as fertility goes higher, the yields don't go higher with it. It gets to a point where it sort of reaches an optimum level, and all we end up doing is just burning money. And it doesn't add to anything. In fact, it makes it worse because you get an imbalance of nutrients. Too much nitrogen, too much potassium, not enough calcium. It all affects the plant health, An imbalance of potassium starts affecting calcium-magnesium ratios. We probably won't taste it, but I can tell you now, diseases love plants that are a bit softer, and this is what happens when we get these nutrient imbalances. And they're more predisposed to drying out and wilting, all these things. And soil testing, as I said, it's something that we do, maybe every 3 or 4 years. I mean, you've got pretty consistent soils. I know people have got this bit of soil, but it's pretty much, the cropping land I've seen is pretty consistent. So having that information will be very useful. I just want to go through here. This is what we can do with new plant varieties. Who's familiar with Dutch cream potatoes? They're very tasty, all right? They're very good. And I'll be the first one. And look, I think I've said this to a few people. Tasmanians are particularly precious about potatoes, all right? So we're just eating the blessed Bismarck potatoes, which is very nice for the new season, and then we'll move on to Nicolas, and when they're done for Christmas, we'll have King Edwards, and after King Edwards, we'll go into our Dutch cream. So you're talking to someone who's pretty precious about the potato, so I hold this close to my heart. So on this table here, we've got the use, the flesh colour, scab resistance, so this is a disease that comes on the skin. It doesn't really affect the yield, but it makes the potato pretty unsightly. It looks like black ink spots on there. You tell your kids it's not a problem and they never get over it. Blight, so this is a foliar disease. Who's heard of Irish blight? Yeah, so there's two sorts. There's target spot, sclerotinia, alternaria. We've got Irish blight, dormancy and yield. So Dutch cream, I'll come on this side. People mentioned they were getting Fidelia in, which is a pretty new variety, okay? And then we've got one which is called Moonlight. So this has been bred in New Zealand by Plant and Food. Moonlight actually now would be considered probably outclassed as a variety. I tried to pick the same one all the way through. So use, Dutch cream, multi-purpose, perhaps not very good for making chips out of, but they bake and they're a great table potato. So is Fidelia and so is Moonlight. Moonlight's probably actually more multi-purpose, that with the starch and the dry matter in there, you can make chips out of it. In fact, they use it for making a lot of wedges. Flesh colour, Dutch cream, yellow-white, Fidelia, yellow-white. Moonlight is white, so I couldn't quite get it to match up for you, but close enough. Scab resistance, Dutch cream is low, Fidelia is moderate-high, Moonlight is high resistance to both, all right? So we've got natural plant resistance in there, which is great, because there's not a lot you can do about scab apart from rotate your potatoes around. There's really not a chemical treatment that's overly effective. Dormancy is a really interesting one. This is when you pick the potato out of the ground, how long before it wants to go and start shooting again? It's keeping quality, all right? No one likes a soft potato. It's not nice, and we all get it at the end of the season though, because we're waiting for the new stuff to come on. Dutch cream is short medium. Fidelia is long. Moonlight is very long, all right? So we've got a really long keeping potato. And the last one is yield. Dutch cream's medium, Fidelia is high, Moonlight is very high. So we use plant genetics to come through.
When you say long, or when you say how long it can keep, or how long is that? Figures on that?
We're talking probably around 28 to 32 weeks. I can be fairly specific in around that.
In a cold storage.
It needs, yeah, look, it's interesting. So dormancy for these, we're talking sort of in that 16 to 18 degree temperature range. You put them in cold storage, so we're talking 6 degrees and stuff like that, no problems. You can push these out to 35 weeks. I mean, they all extend. The warmer it is, the bigger the problem we've got. Now, what's interesting is Moonlight in Tasmania, the first crop of these goes in September, August, September-ish. The last crop goes in February and March. So combine the planting window with the dormancy means that we can essentially have Moonlight potatoes throughout the year that haven't been in particularly long storage for any one single time. Does that make sense? Yeah. Sequence of plantings combined with dormancy is the way we go through.
And when you talk about yield, what's medium and what's very high? How many to one, you know?
Yeah, let's say, I'll work it like this. Let's say if we got 10 kilos of Dutch cream for a given area, Fidelia is probably around about 12, 13, and this would be 16 to 18. 50%. Yeah, very significant. The latest varieties, now I've got to tell you that Moonlight takes around 125, 130 days to grow. So the latest ones, and they're not a very exciting name, Crop 60, Crop 85, they're short maturity varieties. We get everything out of this, but we're doing it in about 90 days. All right? Whether you choose to use Moonlight or not, or Fidelia, the world is moving on. All right? So what happened, this has come out of a Dutch breeding program where they took away nearly every fungicide in the Netherlands. So they said, well, you've got to give us resistant potatoes. But they've also got to yield well, and they need to be able to be eaten by us, because we don't want like a processing industrial high starch potato that you put into a factory. So that's how this stuff happens. And then it goes to New Zealand and it's got to get adapted to the southern hemisphere conditions and break the season dormancy on it. So there's a lot out there. I could throw up zucchinis, I could throw up tomatoes, cabbages, I could throw up countless numbers of things, all right? So the world of plant breeding is just ripping ahead in leaps and bounds. Someone asked me a question this morning about what's the state of new agricultural chemicals coming on, and I said poor, all right? But I'll tell you now, the world of plant breeding is awesome, what's coming out. These aren't transgenic crops, so these aren't GMOs. These are conventionally bred. It's what's going on. So just a nice, quick example of what can be there. There's an opportunity. Yep. 20 minutes? 20 minutes to go, or? Ah, crikey. You could see I could sit here and talk all night because I get quite excited because it's my passion and my profession. Right, the sewage treatment plant needs to be redeveloped. There is the opportunity, and I mentioned this last time, biosolids, all right? What are they? They are the solid material. The liquid goes one way and the solid comes another, all right? And we've got the opportunity for recycled water. So the plans are using, I wrote this down, membrane aerated biofilm reactor. I had to write that down because I couldn't say MBAR. It's very good technology. It will allow the separation of biosolids one way, which is the nutrient-rich, high-carbon material here, and the opportunity to make Class A irrigation water there. Class A irrigation water, the definition of that is potable, no, non-potable, crikey, don't say potable, non-potable domestic water. In Australia, we are not allowed to drink recycled water, unlike other parts of the world. All right, Singapore and places like that have to do it. Or unrestricted agricultural use. So there's a lot that goes in behind that to allow that water to be used. But there's 55 megalitres of water going out to the sea in a drying climate. So there's the opportunity to use some of this water. Now, to do it, there's got to be the appropriate treatment processes. There'll have to be a pump, or pumps. There'll have to be some pipelines, a buffer storage. So what we're trying to have there is the treatment water only comes out at a particular rate of flow, but the other user wants a bit more. You know, so there's got to be some storage tanks. We're not talking vast quantities. There's got to be interest from users, and it's got to be practical. But you can use it on pasture, fruit and vegetable crops. Biosolids, so extracting the biosolids, go one way. Incorporate it with green waste. I've said this this morning, and I'm very happy to say this, that hot rot facility is world class. It's an elite piece of waste management material. Produce compost and produce a high quality, clean, balanced compost. By the calculations we've done, don't laugh at this, but biosolids are pretty much the same wherever you go in the world because it comes from a human and we're all about the same. And you've got no heavy industry that goes into it. So it's actually relatively innocuous compared to the stuff that we have to deal with out of Melbourne and things like that, which goes through heavy industry, and it can only get used for landfill and filling up the bottom of skyscrapers and things like that. Anyway, with the amount of biosolids based on 55 megalitres and the population base, there is the opportunity to, it looks like we can replace about 80% of the imported nutrients coming onto the island. That's significant, and it's not something to be sort of discounted and moved on, because you'll always use the toilet, all right? So there's always this resource going to be there, all right? You're not going anywhere, nor the biosolids. So that's a great thing to do. I'll move on. Be great to see invigoration of the protected cropping production systems. I saw greenhouses that would like some more love. I saw greenhouses that have been abandoned. I talked to some people that were very interested in moving forward. You know what greenhouses do. They're fantastic. There's the opportunity, I guess, to use these little ones on the bottom here. These are called cloches. They're low down to the ground. You can use polyfilm around them. You could use insect-proof mesh. There's a lot of things that could be done. If we're going to go and expand that or redevelop it and keep working through, got to make sure that there's rotation of crops in there to prevent soil-borne disease, because you can't keep growing the same thing again and again, because otherwise you will get development of root disease and you can't go back in there for 20, 30 years with a similar crop. That's how long some of these diseases can last. Ventilation is king, all right? If you can get 8 kilometres an hour movement in a polyhouse, you will drastically reduce the amount of disease pressure, drastically. But if you have no ventilation in there, it's just a little bit of time before you get something severe. Anyway, and last to finish off, select appropriate varieties for this type of production system. So there's field production varieties and there's varieties that have been bred for covered production. Right, having a cool storage facility, whether it's privately run or community run, would be awesome, okay? So one, and look, this is very useful. It'll extend the shelf life and the supply of produce out there. That'd be great. However, what I would really like, and I'll just take you to this point through, if you can store your own seed potatoes on this island, then you are insulated from the importation issues that come in. You can go and buy generation 1, so these are the little tiny baby potatoes, and do your own seed production. Because if we keep growing the same potato year after year, the vigour and the quality declines and the disease accumulates, so we can't keep growing. But if you have a dedicated small area of your own seed production, it would be awesome. It'd be fantastic. You do not need very large areas to produce a lot of seed, all right? So there is that opportunity, and I think it would be fantastic. Combine storing with varieties with a long dormancy or appropriate dormancy, and these new varieties which have such a long planting window, if you had that available, you would have year-round supply of potatoes. You know, we do it in Tasmania in a very inclement potato growing environment, trust me. You know, we have frosts, it's cold, you know, here is great. Certainly got to address the irrigation side of things, because if you want to grow potatoes in January and February and things like that, it's dry. So relying on natural rainfall. Just the management of it, I do discuss in the paper, in the report, sorry. Anyone that's involved in commercial agriculture, it's a business, all right? And I just want to take you to one point here. Just do your budgets, make it work out, and then pay yourself, all right? You've got to pay yourself, okay? So I deal with big operations and small operations, and I've seen where things come unstuck. Because if you hurt yourself or you want to go on a holiday and you're trying to bring someone in and say, well, I work for $10 an hour and so are you, and they'll go, thank you very much. No, I'll go and sit on the beach and enjoy your fine weather. So there is a business plan. I think anyone that's coming into agriculture, they need to go through this, because we all go straight to how fun is this going to be to grow stuff, and they don't concentrate enough or have a plan in their head about the cash flows and all these dry topics, but that's just how the world works, all right? There is a business plan template in there that allows people to go through. Education extension, I was thrilled to be able to go to the school, and now they've moved into the Australian curriculum. So there is kinder to year 12, they have subjects in there called food and fibre and food specialisation. And whether my son and daughter, my daughter wouldn't, but my son is. He's studying food and fibre in grade 7 in Penguin, same course content. What it's designed to do is get the kids interested in agriculture. Where's your food come from? How does it get growing? And we just want that to scoop up one young man, one young woman to get an interest and a passion and come into it. Because we don't need everyone to be farmers, but bloody hell, we've got to have them there, okay? If we don't, and yeah, we've got some big problems. But it needs buy-in and support from parents, and most importantly, the wider community. Give those kids the opportunity to learn and understand and go and get their hands dirty and taste some fruit and taste some bad vegetables and good vegetables and all these things, understand about how things spoil and how nature works, because it's pretty easy, even in your environment here, it's pretty easy for kids to get disconnected from this sort of stuff. So, yeah, help with that. But because it's part of their curriculum, they have to study it. They don't have a choice. I think it's until grade 9 it becomes, or is it 10, it becomes an elective. Now it's mandatory. So important. Extension, just share knowledge, do this sort of stuff, record these things, record these events, so people who can't get here can come and learn about it. Fact sheets, whatever has to be done, whatever will help people to go forward. And this sort of extension stuff is no different from anywhere I work in Australia. You know, we used to pump out lots of pamphlets and people would read it and go, that's good. In Tasmania, we use a lot of fires with, because they're just, but the way technology is now, you can have podcasts, you can go and review stuff, you can slow it down, watch it at quarter pace, 3/4 pace, speed it up, whatever it is. There's so many great opportunities in there. So here's the things, short term, hopefully this will get talked out on Monday. Here's your freight and logistics, but I did put that at the top in there. It's beyond my pay grade. I just am an advisor in agriculture, but you know, you deal with this all the time, but this is very important. I would do this. This goes pretty high up with soil testing. Okay, so I would undertake some soil testing. There is the opportunity to use these labs. It's listed, the protocols, how to go through, what we have to write on the bags, etc., and those sort of things, and how to go about doing it. Agronomic and crop production practices, they rate highly. And this one here, maybe this should have gone above that one. Introduce new vegetable varieties, and lastly, reinvigorate some of the protected cropping. Long term, is the sewage treatment plant upgrade. These take years to build, but if you go into it with the mindset of we've got some good stuff which is going out to the sea, and I did say good stuff, not just waste. We use the word recycling, it can't be considered waste anymore. It's great. It's really good. And we do this right across Australia. We work with very big schemes. We work with small little town schemes. We need to, so that's the recycled water. Here's the biosolids. Cool storage. Shelf life is handy, but I think this big one here, having the capacity to store seed would be great for potato production. And this is just ongoing. In fact, maybe this should have been the top of everything, is that whole education extension, particularly the education, because it takes a long time for these kids to get exposed to in kindergarten and then turn into, you know, young women and young men when they're 17 and 18, and whether they go off and follow their own pursuits on mainland Australia or further afield, whatever it is. But hopefully there'll be good consumers and you know, either they feed back up to people what they want in their food or get directly involved in food production. And I might have gone a bit over time, but that's what I've got to say. The report is fairly long. I think it's the longest one I've ever written. It's practical, and I'm done.
Okay, so we'll keep it very brief, very quick as well, to enable Errol and other members probably of the farming and the Food and Farming Alliance that's been established in Norfolk Island to have a chance to speak with you. The strategy, the food security strategy, is online, and you'll have probably you'll have the opportunity to look at it hopefully and go through the various recommended action that requires more than 10 minutes to really go through and explain. And so I'll just explain this food security strategy, as we said earlier, is a framework to guide policy, action and investment into strengthening Norfolk Island food system. It is built around 4 pillars. Those 4 strategic pillars are local agricultural production. How can we expand local food production in Norfolk Island? Essentially agricultural production. The second pillar is around building a sustainable local food economy. The third pillar is around knowledge, skills and capacity. We've heard from Jason how important it is not only to have capacity and skills within the community to grow food, but also to be understanding of food systems issues and being more responsible consumers when it comes to sourcing our foods. And the fourth pillar is around food security governance. I think that's a very important aspect of this work, of this strategy, and moving forward, what are the foundations for this food security strategy in terms of its implementation and going forward. So under the four pillars, we've got 11 key priorities. I'll go through this and then run through the various priorities and recommended actions more quickly, given we're limited in times. So in terms of expanding and diversifying local agricultural production, we've identified 5 key priorities. One is protecting agricultural land and increasing land under cultivation. The second key priorities is improving access to agricultural inputs to be less reliant on importation of production inputs into agricultural production. The third key priorities is around pest and disease management. It's an important issue. We've got Anthony Rice here. It's important to build capacity within the community for this not to be an obstacle or impediment to the expansion of agricultural production or even sustaining the current production capacity. Fourth key priorities is about shifting towards more sustainable and regenerative farming practices, going potentially all the way to where Norfolk Island could be, as many other communities around the world have set themselves the objective to be, and that is organic farming. It's a progressive sort of journey towards that. So encouraging sustainable and regenerative farming practices that benefits soils and the environment, as well as the quality of the food that consumers eat, is important. The fifth key priority is around water availability. Farming is reliant on water. Currently, production levels have been impacted by water scarcity, probably not in the last 12 months, but in the previous years. And so that's another important issue to address. Building a sustainable food economy, so this is the second pillar. It's essentially around infrastructures for the food systems. We've heard Jason talk about storage, but also processing and adding value-adding infrastructure capacity is important for the community to be able to, again, lessen its dependence on importation of a range of food products that could be produced on Ireland based on primary production and with the capacity to add value locally. The seventh key priority is around agri-food business development. There's a range of recommended actions for the community to expand its agri-food sector. I'll go through this in slightly more details when I come to the key actions. The fourth pillars are on knowledge, skills and capacity. Essentially, there are two strategic priorities. One is around agricultural skills and capacity development, including addressing the issue of labour shortages. Again, in terms of obstacles to sustaining or increasing agricultural production, a lot of the people that I've spoken with, farmers, food producers, do not have access to sufficient labour to sustain or increase capacity. And food literacy, again, coming back to this important point, which is for all members of the community, not necessarily intending to grow food or to be part of the agricultural production system, but to be able to understand the intricacy of food systems and the food, where the food comes from and how it impacts the environment, the community and our own health. Food security governance, essentially two key priorities. One is around strategic food system planning, and as I mentioned earlier, it's really about thinking about this food security strategy piece as in a holistic way, thinking about it as something that can not only benefit the community from a food security perspective, but from a range of other perspectives, and therefore requires to move from a thinking around which agency or entity at the government level would be responsible for it, for moving from a more integrated approach to looking at how all the actors can be involved in this process. And finally, investment and access to finance. Generally, agricultural food systems have been lacking support at the level of production at the local community level. A lot of aspiring food producers on the island and existing food producers have mentioned to me that access to capital is sometimes the obstacle to move forward to sustain or increase production. So that's something that is important and for different actors involved to be thinking about. So very quickly, you can read it through and you'll have time to go through the strategy at home. I don't know how I'm going with time, if it's close to 10 minutes already. Sorry if I didn't hear that, so I'm just going to go through. So protecting agricultural land and increasing land cultivation, what we're proposing is to identify these areas as Jason has done through his work and developing some guidelines to ensure that high quality agricultural land is protected for future generations and not subject to development or urban expansion. More immediately also is how we can facilitate access to underutilized land for farming or livestock production. So considering business models that enable people that have land, that not necessarily have the time and the interest or the capacity to grow food, to make this land available for others that may want to grow food but not have access to the land. That's also true for public land, publicly owned land. There's council operational land, there's Crown land on Norfolk Island that is not utilised but could be put to better use for agricultural production as well. Another recommended action is, that's part of this whole discussion, expansion and diversification of fruit and vegetable production. So nursery development to improve capacity. We've talked about this with the group that has been formed. How can we enable this infrastructure that enable the expansion of fruit and fruit and vegetable production to be going ahead, and the propagation of appropriate root stocks. There's some capacity on the island, but how can we increase that by providing the facilities that would enable it? The second priority is improving access to agricultural inputs, again lessening the dependence on what's coming in via freight to make businesses less vulnerable to disruptions, to heavy, to costs that can be sometimes an impediment to pursuing various agricultural activities. So essentially, we've talked about organic soil fertilizers. We've got a very good system on Norfolk Island for composting, but limited capacity. I understand how can we increase the capacity, and Jason's made some recommendation around that. It's also about the production of animal feed. I think that there's a big gap on Norfolk Island, and again, reliance on importing meat, importing dairy products could be improved. I think that if the solution or the impediment to that is animal feed, I think it would be an important action to look into ways to produce animal feed on the island to enable this. Pest and disease management, I won't go through this again, expanding or supporting the shift towards regenerative farming practices, so enabling farmers and aspiring farmers to learn about regenerative farming practices with knowledge hubs that would be created on the island with the existing knowledge on the island, and bringing in the external expertise or resources that might be required to build knowledge and capacity on the island. And the last sort of key point in that priority, I think that it would be important to provide comprehensive support for local farmers to be able to transition to organic production. Obviously, not everyone might be interested. We're seeing this in different parts of the world. There's reluctance to do so, but when there's a willingness, I think that support would be very important for farmers that are wishing to do so. Water availability and access, that's another priority that needs to be investigated. In terms of food system infrastructure, it's about storage and also, and mainly, as I said earlier, adding value to primary products to be able to expand the range of food products that are produced on Norfolk Island sustainably and be less reliant on the importation of a range of food products. It's about also thinking what would be the requirements for local meat and poultry production industry to be able to go ahead on Norfolk Island. In terms of the priority 7, enabling environment for agri-food business development, there's a range of key recommended actions. I'll go through essentially the measures that to enhance the economic viability and profitability of farms and agri-food businesses. There's a range of measures and tools that are used to support local food businesses. Public procurement has been around the world a main tool that governments have been using to support local food producers. Another area that Norfolk Island has the potential to expand is agro-ecotourism. We've talked about this through the many conversations that we've had with the community. There's a great potential here to be explored. Organic certification as well. There's been discussion last year about establishing a cooperative structure on Norfolk Island. That's where the work that the Food and Farming Alliance is now sort of headed towards. I think that would enable several food producers that do not necessarily produce at scale to be commercially viable, but to be part of a system, a cooperative system that share resources and knowledge and equipment to enable that to be part of what supplies the market in terms of access to increase access to fresh produce produced in Norfolk Island. I'm not sure in terms of time how I'm going, so I don't know whether there's. Yeah, that's right. So I'll just move on. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
One of the biggest things seems to be to use our sewerage to save on imports, to use water.
We'll just allow Christelle to whip through the rest of the presentation.
So I guess priority 8 and 9, again, it's around skills, knowledge and capacity. So the main recommendations in relation to skills and capacity development are around facilitating access to educational training opportunities. That is through incentivizing, encouraging Norfolk Island students to undertake agricultural training to become food producers in Norfolk Island, either via the Central School. Now that Norfolk Island has adopted the Australian curriculum that will be made possible, hopefully, or off island with scholarships or other forms of support. It's also the other important part in terms of capacity development is labour placements. That's a recommendation, but how can we ensure that labour is not an obstacle or impediment for food producers, farmers to sustain production? So that's something that needs to be considered. Providing access to agronomic extension services as well is something that we've been discussing. In what form or context, this is something that needs to be considered. And food literacy, essentially via the school, and we've seen that this is something that is part of the curriculum, so encouraging and supporting the education sector in including food education, food literacy programs, garden-based learning in the school curriculum. This needs to be extended to the community. How can we support the development of gardening and food nutrition education programs for community, including organising regenerative farming workshops, cooking demonstrations, etc. And encouraging and supporting community gardens as well is an important way in terms of getting community to participate in food production and have access to the food that people get involved in growing. So I guess, I hope I've got a few more minutes, because to me the governance, so the food security governance pillar is an important sort of aspect of the whole strategy in terms of going forward. And in terms of implementation of the strategy and forward thinking around strategic food system planning, the recommendation is to establish an advisory committee or task force that would oversee the implementation of the strategy, and that needs to be with cross-sector representation. I think all levels of governments need to be represented and involved in this going forward, as well as members of the community. So this task force really needs to be multi-level and cross-sectoral. Another recommendation is to appoint a coordinator, which would have the mandate to advise on development of food policies, but also to coordinate technical assistance, including agronomic extension services, for instance, or bringing external expertise when required to support farming and food production. I think it's important also to resource community groups, whether it's the Food and Farming Alliance or the Growers Co-op Sustainability Hub that have been established or being in the process of being established in this community to promote more sustainable ways in the community, whether it's in relation to food, around waste, whether it's in relation to farming and food consumption. And that will also enable to lead to changes in the food system through intersectoral work and multi-stakeholder relationships building. The last priority is around investment and access to finance. I think it is important to mobilise finance towards agricultural development and food production. That's a gap. There's always a gap between, in terms of credit access for a lot of food producers, that creates disincentive for people to start in the business. So I think it's really important for government to work with key stakeholders to incentivise and support the development of the agri-food sector on Norfolk Island, to improve access to finance for agri-food entrepreneurs, whether it is through the setting up of a community investment fund. There are different models around the world that Norfolk Island can look into, or whether it is a grant program from the government that would support directly local food producers, or potentially also establish a fund, government-backed fund, to provide financing and technical assistance. The last point, which is around the taxes and how can we encourage, again, the sustainable food production through, I mentioned here tax rebates on land rates, but there are different tax incentives that can be looked into to incentivise food producers. So just very quickly, in terms of the key messages, and I'll go very quickly through this because we've already talked about this extensively, but it's really about, the first point is moving from siloed approach to the governance of food security to a more coordinated approach involving all levels of government. Public investment is important in whatever form. I think that it is crucial to see this as a strategic sort of investment in a community, and to help build a local food economy requires that initial investment from support from government. It is also finally, I think, about community ownership and leadership, and I think that this is very much what's going to be should be driving this forward in terms of what kind of structures, what kind of finance models are needed to go forward, and to suggest to government the way forward. So we can't expect government to be providing funding without the community sort of asking for it in a very determined and structured way. So I think on that note, I think it's for Errol to introduce the Food and Farming Alliance that was established this year after many sort of iterations and discussions. I think that's a very good initiative, and I'm very pleased to hear more about it. Thank you.
Just jump to the upstream. All right, can everybody hear me? Do I need the mic, or am I right? Not clear? Crystal clear, thank you. That's good, that's good. My name is Errol. I am the chairperson, president of the Food and Farming Alliance. Just to give a bit of background, the Food and Farming Alliance has come from, on the 28th of April, there was an organised informal meeting with food producers, landholders that expressed an interest in repurposing their land for productive use and potentially informing a collective or co-op to share risk and resources and establish a community of practice around regenerative farming. Everyone understands the current challenges that the island is facing in terms of access to fresh produce and potential as well to be more self-sufficient, including a range of processed food that could be produced on island with adequate infrastructure and equipment. So that's the basis that the Food and Farming Alliance was started. There was a group of people that came together, and then they've been meeting, or progressive meetings have been held since then. So we've been working as a group since April. Some have come and some have gone, and you'll find that a lot of what we've been working on, funnily enough, has actually been coming out in the reports. So not that we've had access to the reports prior and developed it from the reports. These are the things that we've identified that we believe that we could facilitate and work on as a co-op. So I'm actually grateful that they marry up. It's amazing. So our mission, to encourage and assist people to improve the food and farming production on Norfolk Island, from backyard to business. So from your veggie patch gardeners to your commercial growers, to your meat producers, your chicken producers, your egg producers, and maybe even someday seafood. Who knows what we'll come up with as Norfolk Islands adapt. Our vision, to work with all involved from pasture to plate, individual business and governments, to build world-class, thriving, sustainable food and farming industry on Norfolk. I think that's what everybody wants, to be able to have a sustainable, and I do believe we need to work with the individuals all the way up to governments, local, federal. So that is our key vision, and I think everything that we need to do needs to be aimed at that, so that we're providing a benefit for the community in the long run, because it's all about the community and sustainability and livability of Norfolk. So our core focuses: growing knowledge and education, growing networks and resources, growing a healthy community. So in those, the education, actually, I'll just move that. Sorry. So within the education section, our priorities have been highlighted that we respectfully need to collect information from the long-time growers, from the older growers that are on the island, that have a wealth of knowledge, and retain it. Retain it so that it can be passed on, because who knows when that knowledge won't be walking around amongst us. Yeah. Collect information from external sources, from abroad. Business management, best practices, new technologies, new products. We need to collect that. Provide access to this. So we want to provide a central place, a website where members can come and find this information. Find it from the locals if we've got it stored. Find it from overseas and make it an easier way. A place that is centred so that it's reducing the barriers of new growers, of younger growers coming in and being able to go, actually, I'll go to this website, I'll find this information. I won't be as daunted, because as everyone's identified, growing on Norfolk is different. So we need to collate the information. To facilitate educational opportunities with local and overseas experts, to facilitate educational tours and working farms. Now, that is already been done. So we'd like to encourage that and work with those that are doing it already, as well as promote it and enhance it. And if there's areas that we've got access to, that working farms or members that want to show off one of their techniques, that'd be a fantastic. I think field trips have been really well done and looked forward to by the community. Partner with educational institutes to encourage training of students. That's a given, from prep to universities. We're a unique biodome. Without having a glass roof over us, we're unique. So there's lots of studies and tours which are already being done, but we'd like to work with them and encourage them and enhance. So that's the educational, growing network and resources. To link people with land and assets that aren't utilising them as well as they could be. So to provide that linkage. To link people who have machinery and skills that run services. I know some of the issues we've faced is people aren't sure of whether they can find a contracting person who ploughs or tills, or so who are the networks? So just to provide an avenue to link people, not necessarily provide the service ourselves. We don't want to be doing that, but provide that assistance. Inform members, find grants and money that is available for community, for business development, for whether it be water storages, whether it be a federal grant or maybe a local grant, and then also provide a service where we find someone who's good at writing grants and help the person who's wanting the grant to apply for it. I don't know about you, I'm hopeless at filling in paperwork and you tick in the right boxes and then you go to this. There is an art form to filling that in. So that's another service and another benefit that we feel we want to provide to the community. Advocate for the members, from suppliers, from buyers and local government. If there's a collective, it's a lot stronger voice than just a solitary voice. So, and there's buying power, there's also governments will listen if you've got more members. So we're wanting to come together. So we are currently looking at setting up paths for importation of new fruit tree recipes. We're looking at what's involved in first of all being able to import them, but then there's also the other thing is once you get them on island, if it's a tissue culture or if it's root or if it's buds, we've got members that are currently working to facilitate or map out the steps and what's required. So we're looking into applying and working on nursery. Basically that's the next one of the steps, because we may find the pathway to get it in here, but there's not enough root stock, there's not enough forward planning to get those things in line so that when we do import them, they're a success. The other thing is to business plan, to look at the other side. Okay, we import all this root stock, get these trees growing. Does anyone want to buy them? Does anyone want to plant them? And then what's the return for those that do? So we're looking at a business model. So, and following on from that, we're wanting to conduct business viability studies to invest in machineries, in plants and other things. So they are the things that we are working on for networks and resources and funding. It was interesting that Christelle brought up the funding. Maybe there's avenues for the Alliance to work with that and to assist to get the funding out to the to the members and the growers on Norfolk. Finally, growing a healthy community. It's promoting, we believe in promoting the benefits. The fact that you're still encouraging people to move at all ages, the joy that it brings when you get that bud or that plant that you thought was dead and there's a green shoot on it and it just comes alive and you go, yes, we've still got it. And then there's just the nutritional advantages and of the locally produced food that hasn't had to be shipped, hasn't had to be fumigated, hasn't sat on a wharf and then delivered to us. If it's locally, as everyone knows, it's either that day or it's that week or it's there. So my next slide is, so therefore we feel that we've been preparing the ground, the Food and Farming Alliance, and we're about ready to start seeding. So these ideas are all seeds. They're not just there for the people that are on the working group, but they're for the members. And we're wanting to set this up as a co-op because then the knowledge belongs to the community. Everything then belongs to the members. And it's not my information, it's not the Alliance, but it's set up as a co-op, so what is retained and therefore any benefit, and it needs to be run as a business so that it can be sustainable. So it doesn't need and rely on just volunteers, but it can be growing. Now it needs to provide benefit to the members. That's my criteria, key criteria, is that it's got to be benefiting those. So by linking together, we can work to rejuvenate the sustainable food and farming industry on Norfolk. At this stage, the key thing that I'd like to encourage people to do is there's forms on the back table. Please fill them out. It's a questionnaire. It's not a membership form at this point in time. It's a document or it's an indication of interest that you want to be involved, because I believe Norfolk is a special place and I'm excited by the potential. It's just a matter of getting together and working on all these things that we can do. Now, and the great thing is people may have different interests within this organisation. One of the other things I did forget in the resources was I have been looking at and working on, well, not working on, but I have ideas of labour, because that is one of our key deficits on the island, is the ability to have people come alongside. So once again, there have been people I've been speaking to that are interested in the importation of new fruit trees and tissue stocks, and have said, we're going off island. Actually, I worked in a nursery. I'll be speaking to these people. So what I would encourage you to do is, on the forms, if you're interested in a particular area within the food and farming, fill it in, because we want to group people together to develop and work on where their passions lie, because that's when they'll find the most joy. So thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.